Okay, so now we have to continue the adaptation components in India. We have been talking, just to remind you, we have been talking about the adaptations to climate change. We have discussed about the climate change and its vulnerability, and now we have discussed about the measures, especially which are taken in India. So, what are adaptation components in India? We must focus on those things. At least for our country, we must understand the details. The major components of adaptations are crop improvement and research, drought proofing and flood control, health improvement and preventations of diseases, risk financing, disaster management, forest conservation, and poverty alleviation and livelihood preservation. The crop improvement is very important because the agriculture, especially plant agriculture, is very much vulnerable to climate change. Climate change consequences are considered as drought, flood, disasters, increasing disasters, change in raining season, rainfall pattern, and uh, increasing the incidence of disease. All these aspects are related to crop productivity, and crop productivity is very vulnerable to the climate change, especially in arid and semi-arid regions like India, and obviously other regions where the agroclimatic conditions are similar, like India, or even if they are different, but there are arid zones and semi-arid zones, then there will be major impact on crops due to climate change impacts. Even in temperate regions, a lot of impact have been observed on crop productivity. For example, in Himachal Pradesh and Kashmir in India, and in Uttarakhand, certain areas of Uttarakhand also. Similarly, in many other temperate regions beyond the country or within the country, many agricultural and horticultural plants are losing their productivity, especially for apple. The changes in frost occurrence, season wise and intensity wise, have been reported to uh, cause a very severe negative impact on the agricultural productivity. For basmati rice, it has been reported that the pollination gets affected if the drought and high temperature is observed. So many kind of impacts has been observed. Impacts have been observed rather on crop uh, patterns, crop productivity, crop yield. Therefore, the improvement of crop varieties to make them climate resilient and disease resistant require a lot of new and novel research activities. So this is one area where we can adopt a lot of agronomical practices can be followed for adaptation, like developing furrows for water conservation, drip irrigation, or sprinkler irrigation to save water and to make the availability of water for longer period. And similarly, uh, the varietal improvement for control of diseases, for tolerance to diseases, and for tolerance to abiotic stresses like drought, flood, and uh, so on. Drought proofing and flood control is very, very important, not only for agriculture but for protection of infrastructure, protection of life, and protection of land uh, also. The green belt and forest and agricultural land can be destroyed. The habitats can be destroyed by drought and by flood. So the climate change has increased the occurrence of drought, frequency of drought, intensity of drought, and flood. Sometimes drought and flood occur simultaneously in different part uh, of a country or of a region of the world. So a lot of adaptation approaches will be required for this. Prevention of diseases is very important. Now you can just see we have been suffering from a global pandemic like COVID-19, and this is also considered to be related with deforestation, mutations, and environmental deteriorations. So, climate change is also considered as a factor for occurrence and sustainability of these kind of deadly pathogens. So, health system throughout the world has to be has to be developed to adopt these kind of new diseases and new intensity of diseases where a large population is getting affected simultaneously. So, how to handle the illness of a large population and severe illness of a large population is a matter of concern which require a reorganization of entire health system, health infrastructure, development of drugs, and management of diseases. So, all these kind of adaptations will be required, and India is targeting these kind of adaptations too. Well, many sectors are emerging which are having more risk to climate change occurrence. So, those sectors, if they are important, no one will go for investing in those sectors, and that will be a very serious economic problem. So, risk financing is required. A mechanism has to be developed for risk financing, and India is tuned to develop the a kind of infrastructure and governance system for the risk financing through various kinds of insurances and banking networks. Disaster management is a prime area where a lot of input is required. It requires infrastructure and preparatory measures from national level to ground level. And at international level, also global level, capacity building for disaster management is required. A lot of work is going on in India for disaster management, and the central agencies, NIDM, National Institute for Disaster Management, under which the, the disaster system is worked, and every district is supposed to have disaster management infrastructure, manpower, and capabilities. So that is very much required at district level, state level, national level, global level, and even at say a region level, a village level, a city level. So disaster management is one area where a lot of skill development, infrastructure development, and research is required. Forest conservation is very vibrant area to cope with climate change related problems. Climate change impacts are largely related to uh, the greenhouse, the global warming, which are largely uh, a consequence of built-up of greenhouse gases. So, for greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and nitrous oxides, sulfur oxides, and other obviously various forms of chlorofluorocarbons, water vapors, and all those forms methane, these greenhouse gases can be absorbed and assimilated by plants, green plants, for photosynthesis. They can convert these these gases into food, and through that food chain, various life forms can utilize those greenhouse gases in organic form for their energy requirements. So, forests are considered as the most important sink for the carbon sequestration, and therefore it is assumed that about 33% forest cover, dense forest cover, is required to make the earth livable, to decrease the impact of climate change, which is uh, going to increase in a negative way due to more emissions, more population, and more industrialization. The forest is the answer. The forest cover. So we have to think about developing forest to new areas, to making the already existing diverse forests which have gone to deterioration. We can redevelop them, and we can make natural multi organism forest to increase the above ground and below ground carbon sequestration sink. So this is one very important area, and obviously the government in most of the countries and in India too have a big department, forest department, and a ministry for forest environment and climate change at national level and state level, and a very uh, large number of uh, trained manpower has been introduced. A very good budget has been allocated for forest conservation, and we hope that this can help a lot in adaptation to the climate change. Well, poverty alleviation and livelihood preservation are important because some of the capacity problems are related to adaptation problems, are related to poverty and livelihood problem. Many people who live in and around the forest, they require forest products and forest the damage in forest is obvious. So if they will come out of these kind of very essential requirements on which minimum requirements they are leaving, the forest cover can be saved and can be developed. So new kind of forest, new kind of ecosystems can be developed, which can help them in poverty elevation and which can provide jobs and commercial uh, network for their livelihood. So these kinds of adaptations are uh, considered as important components in India and elsewhere. Uh, as percentage of GDP, the increase in adoption costs is as follows. 2004-5, it was 0.88%. 2005 to 2006, it was raised to, it was considered to be more expensive, and the estimate raised it by 1.61%. Similarly, in an estimate for 2006 to 07, it raised to 2.17% of GDP. So you can see the adaptation cost is consistently increasing because of hike in the prices and because of the uh, increasing requirements of climate adaptations due to uh, due to increasing incidences of the climate change and improvement in living standards of the population. Uh, Policy initiatives has been taken. Many policy initiatives has been taken in India also for adaptation. For example, rural employment generating scheme like the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, NREGA, which was introduced in 2005 for livelihood security in rural area, is one policy initiative for adaptation to climate change. Then watershed development projects, urban employment programs, programs for tribal youth, afforestation, infrastructure, and insurance sector strengthening are various policy initiatives which have been designed to improve the adaptation capability of the people in India, and similar projects with some differences, some different kind of initiatives which are required for those countries and those regions have been taken in other countries also. The when we talk about when we try to understand the method of implementation for these adaptations, these are considered as following. Under the concept of public-private partnership, these adaptation measures can be implemented involving all stakeholders, for example, central ministries and agencies, state governments, business and industry, civil society, and community level organizations and their representatives at one go in various adaptation programs. The programs can be implemented more successfully. So, all stakeholders have to be motivated, and their involvement in a very managed way can help in a better implementation of the adaptation policies. Both mitigation and adaptation measures are required to be addressed in the mission. The both mitigation and adaptation measures for climate change are sometimes they overlap, and both require similar kind of input, similar kind of planning, similar kind of policy, and it can be done. It has to be managed, it has to be done in a quite short period. So the mission has to be taken, and that's why the countries has developed their mission. India has also developed 8 missions, what we discussed. So mission mode can help in the implementation rapidly, where the people who are involved in a specific mission can be made accountable, and specific requirement of funds can be allocated for the specific missions. Uh, Policy actions are required for successful adaptation, like accurate and disaggregated data is absolutely essential. This is major problem, and this requires a lot of research and translational research. Uh, the data is there, but due to, as I told you earlier, the environment is a very open system and big system. So many assumptions are based on just assumptions or even modeling. So that may not be accurate. So experimental data is required in each field at different levels, and as much as accurate and connective data we can develop, which are not disaggregated, we will be having better strength for developing adaptation strategies and adaptation programs. It requires a improvement in the lack of balanced approach towards addressing all villages and all talukas. It would be worthwhile to involve academic institutions to conduct surveys for assessing the adaptation needs of the various sectors. So our society is quite complex. Different agroclimatic conditions are very complex. So we shall require a, a series of studies from small ecosystems to large ecosystems and biomes and their connectivity. A holistic approach has to be developed, technologies has to be developed, and uh, adaptation measures have to be developed. So it will be very important that research and innovations can be increased with a larger network systems and larger fund allocation to meet out the requirement of climate change related adaptation and mitigations. Well, we have to adopt in public sector, businesses and communities. So working through an adaptation process will be different for communities, different for business and public sector organizations. To reflect this, we have developed a generic adaptation process along with a number of tools and resources to support each sector. So, uh, the adaptation process consists of 5 stages to help you to get start with adaptation, understanding of the assess, the impacts of current and future climate change, then identify and prioritize the adaptation options to address key climate risks and to help implementation of adaptation actions, to evaluate them and continuously monitor and review the work going on. So here you can just see all these points. First is getting started. Second is understanding the impact of climate change. Third is identification and prioritization of action plans. Fourth is action, and fifth is monitoring, review and evaluation of the action taken, and accordingly we can change the plans in the subsequent years. So, 5 stages of the adaptation processes are very, very important. How to start it? This stage of the process includes finding out about the impacts of climate change for a defined country or region. Then understanding why the impacts of climate change matter. And third is raising awareness and agreeing next step. So these are the first step where we have to start the adaptation process for a climate change impact. The second stage is understanding the impact of climate change. So it includes learning about past climate trends and future projections, then understanding how your place, asset, services, or priorities have been affected by severe weather events in the past, and then considering how your place, asset, services, or priorities might be affected as our climate continues to change. So, nothing can be planned without a previous record. So, how previous informations, documentation of what has happened earlier can give us a lead. So, we have to, that's why in all research activities, we just go for understanding what has already been known and what has already been reported. So, by analyzing the previous happenings, previous impacts, previous understanding, previous analysis, we can make the future programs. We can make our new questions and we can develop our methodologies to understand the impacts of climate change. So it is impact of climate change is again will be different on different sectors. There can be vulnerable sectors, there can be non-vulnerable sectors, there can be less impacted sectors, and even in one sector there can be variable kind of impacts which will be dependent on the various other factors, social, economic, uh, environmental, and planning, policies, and governance related factors. There can be various cultural factors, education status, and economic status can also impact. Social ethos and ethnic factors can also impact. So the entire process is quite complex and we have to understand it in quite detail to draw the proper mitigation and adaptation programs. Uh, how we can say there are so many problems? We have been talking about a very complex situation and complex problem, and everything cannot be handled at a time. So, because everything require trained manpower, infrastructure, funds, capabilities, and plans and perspective, and so on. So, we have to prioritize the areas which are more important, which has to be taken first, and then certain areas, certain problems can be kept on waiting. So, we can make a prioritization for the problems to be taken first, second, third, fourth, or so on. So, establishing a vision for a climate ready future is required. Identifying the most significant climate risks are required. Most significant climate risks have to be considered first because their impact can be more on the population and on the environment and also on the infrastructure. Then identifying existing adaptation options are also to be understood, and we have to see whether we can go with them or we have to evolve new adaptation options, new adaptation methods. So evaluation of existing adaptation options is very important, and it has to be identified which one is to be continued and which one is to be discontinued. The examining what further action is needed is another area of prioritization, and it has to be done. So what we have identified in on priority, what we are processing, along with that, we have to understand what can be future actions, and preparation for future action plans can also be initiated simultaneously to make them more successful or more effective. So then fourth stage, as we have discussed, is just to take action. So this stage of the process of adaptation to climate change includes partnership, working, and leadership. Hence, uh, a basically a structure, so that we can go for structured planning. Then collating and presenting the adaptation actions, and building adaptive capacity, implementing on the ground actions, and telling others are uh, fourth action plans. And then fifth is to monitor, review, and evaluate, where we have to monitor, we have to monitor and report the progress. We have to review it regularly and reflect what has worked and why, and evaluate the outcome. So this is very important step to go further, because this is in scientific approach, that something is done and then reviewed, and if required, the required modifications are made in every sector. So this is very, very important for successful success of the adaptations. So these are 5 steps for the success of adaptation, which are taken under adaptation processes.